Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser. And for today's episode, I have on with me a very special guest. I'm pleased to welcome in Nancy Goff. Nancy was in some bands out of Gainesville in the early 80s, one of which, Atoms for Peace, and the other band, Flesh Castanets. And she's done more musically over the years as well. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about her time in Gainesville, but Nancy's here to tell the story. Hi, Nancy. Welcome in.
Hi. Great to be with you.
It's great to have you on. I know that you have been playing music for a long time, and you are a drummer, which I just think back to the time in which some of the bands you were in the early 80s were going on. There really weren't a ton of female drummers. So it's going to be interesting to hear your story going back to that time. So are you ready to tell it?
Definitely.
All right, let's go back to the early beginnings. So where'd you grow up?
I was actually born in Buffalo, New York. Grew up about when I was about 5 to when I was 9. My parents moved us to Canada, which I joke about because it wasn't like Canada, like you think of like the Rocky Mountains. It's like a suburb of Buffalo. It was like right across the bridge. So that's where I had gone to school. From there, when I was 9, we did move to Florida on the West Coast, so around Newport Richey, Port Richey. When I was in 5th grade was the first time you could do an instrument. So my, not my father's side, but my mother's side is all musical. My mother played accordion, piano, organ. She started out by playing clarinet in her high school band. And she actually has, I didn't send you the picture, but she actually was in a all women's band in the 30s. That was like, and they played in a lot of bars in Buffalo, that kind of stuff. So she has the musical background. Her mother also played piano and her father played sax. So everybody's musical on that side. So of course, I always heard her playing, organ or piano or whatever. So when it was 5th grade, when it was like, oh, that way you can get an instrument, pick an instrument. And she was like, no, you really need to, go learn something. I'm like, oh, I have no idea. Wasn't interested in piano, of course, right, or organ that she could have taught me. And I was like, I want to play the trumpet. So smart people back then, this was a long time ago, right? So what they did was when your kid went to join the school band, they rented you the instruments first because they figured, they're not going to stick with this, or they're going to be like, this was a dumb idea. So they didn't make anybody buy anything. So we rented the trumpet for like a month at a time. And I remember I still remember this. I remember sitting in the band and trying to read, and they're teaching you from scratch, right? It's like none of us knew how to read music or do anything, right? So I remember looking at the sheet music and thinking to myself, I will never be able to figure out what notes to press down on this trumpet in time to like play it right. And I was like, this is not going well. And the drummers at the time were in the back of the room with a practice pad. So all you needed to do was buy the practice pad and a stand and a pair of drumsticks. And they were back there going tap, 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 tap. I was like, that looks a lot easier.
Okay.
So that was the end of the trumpet. We got the drumsticks, bought the drum. And my mother was like, they never said anything. It was like, no, you can't do that because you're a girl. She was like, no, we're not. Bought the drum pad and everything. And so I wound up back there. And it was like that mostly through all bands up and through high school. There was like hardly any women even still. High school, we did have a couple with us, like 2 or 3 in our group. But I was the lone female for many years, and elementary school bands, junior high bands, marching bands, high school marching band. It was, and this is like in the early 70s.
Sure.
So not a lot of women were interested in the drums even then.
Were there any drummers you can remember from back in that time period that you enjoyed listening to or perhaps watching play?
It was interesting, like you said, it's still hardly any women drummers, and still today, there's hardly any that made it, really. So the only one, you're going to laugh, the only one we had to go by, which I didn't really, wasn't in that kind of music, but the only person you could watch was Karen Carpenter. She was the only one that was, playing drums,
right.
Mostly singing and playing drums. How she played sometimes in an evening gown, I have no clue.
She did.
but she did, and that's kind of it. And so I think she really got a lot of girls who would never thought of it. We're like, oh man, this girl, and she can sing. And I saw a documentary about her not too long ago, actually, and she made a comment about that. She said she always wanted to be known as a drummer who could sing, not a singer who played the drums. And there is a video of her out there playing like a drum solo, and she was awesome. I mean, you never saw that in the songs. So the songs are kind of, woofy, sort of, you know what I mean? Like, not a lot of, like, kicking drum rolls or anything like that.
There was no real flair to.
No, but left to go by herself, she was good. I mean, I've seen a couple of her solos, but that was kind of it. And then after her, even more recently now, I mean, the only really other person who's kind of made it is Cindy Blackman, who's Carlos Santana's wife. And that's kind of it. I mean, like you said, we had some female bands around Gainesville, even back then, who had drummers, obviously, but just nobody, you know what I mean? Nobody that got far enough to like sort of made it anywhere.
As you think back to some of your earliest memories of just getting exposed to music, what were you listening to as you were growing up, getting into your early teens and then into your 20s?
Well, like I said, my mother played organ, but I mean, she would always still play like the same 3 songs from like the 40s, right? So there was a lot of that kind of music, and I was like, well, that's nice, but that wasn't my thing. So the first time I remember actually picking out somebody, I was probably about 13 or 14. The first person I latched onto was Elton John, and bought everything. Every time he came out with an album, I'd buy it right away. We had albums, and of course, then we switched to 8 tracks. That was fun. But whatever he came up with, he was the first one. After him, I listened to him. Pretty much, like I said, he had maybe 2 or 3 albums out by then, and was just kind of starting-ish, too. But then after him, I kind of graduated in high school. I kind of went to Heart was a big one. Journey, Kansas, Styx, like that kind of stuff. That's what I had kind of started, listening to. Fell in love with Heart. I love them. And same thing, bought all their albums. But as far as like playing, it was, and I'll tell you a quick story, which is really funny. So I was in a high school marching band, and there was a guy, one of the drummers, 2 of the drummers actually, and on the side, they had started like a little garage band thing. And one day they like to play like, rock and roll. And so one day the one guy was like, yo, why don't you come with us? I'll pick you up and I'll take you over to one of the practices. They were practicing in some, god awful lean-to shed thing out in a, behind somebody's house kind of thing. Right. So we go there, and they were trying to play, and the one drummer played, he didn't play, they were both drummers. So one guy played guitar, the other one played drums. And they had a couple other guys I had never met. This was like scandals at the time. I'm sure my parents didn't know where the hell I was, right? And they were trying to play Led Zeppelin. And I remember thinking, oh no, you can't listen to Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin comes with drugs. So I was like, I can't listen to that stuff. I'm going to stick to like Journey and Elton John. They're not doing that kind of thing. Had no idea, right? And that was too funny. That was my first, exposure to Led Zeppelin. I was like, oh no, I can't do Led Zeppelin. Now I love Led Zeppelin, but it was just too funny. It was like, and it'll happen with Atoms for Peace too. Our practice area was another, abandoned barn. It was like, we were all following in the footsteps of like, Leonard Skinner and the Shack in Jacksonville, kind of thing. That's what these old places all looked like, where everybody was practicing.
Right, exactly. And thinking about some of these bands, though, you've mentioned, around this time, or maybe somewhere in the general vicinity, did you start to have any concert experiences? If so, who were you seeing, and what were some of the venues you remember going to?
The first actual big concert I ever went to was Journey. They were playing in Tampa it was Journey and Thin Lizzy, believe it or not, and I forgot who the other band was. There's 3 bands, and that was the first big concert I went to. What was really kind of strange is, this is another kind of little weird story. So at one point when I was living in Florida, my father decided we were going to move back to Buffalo, and I was in the middle of high school. So I had done 10th grade in Florida. We moved back to Buffalo. I was in 11th grade. And like I said, I had grown up in like Canada, not really that, I was born in Buffalo, but I didn't live in Buffalo. So I'm not in this area. I have no idea where I'm at. My sister lived a few blocks away, which is why we were in that, vicinity. And So I'm like, it's freezing, I'm dying because it's like, 20 degrees outside. But I'd walk all over the place. There was a mall right up the street. We'd all walk over to the mall, and there was a strip mall next to it, and we just kind of walk, over. And so one day I was by myself, and in the mall there was a music store. I think it was called Cabbages. And it must have been related to them because this was not in the store. It was outside. So I'm walking around the back of the mall, cutting across this huge parking lot, and there's a band set up, like on a little tiny riser, and it must have been behind the music store, now that I think about it, and they're probably having like a promotion. And I was like, I'll walk over and look at this. So this is the first band I ever saw. Walk over there, and it was the Runaways. And I was like, oh my God. And they were like freezing. They're like standing outside playing in like, 30-degree weather. And it was like, Joan Jett and what was her name? Sandy West, I think her name was, and the Runaways. And they must have been doing like an album promotion, and they had them back at this place in the parking lot, and there was like nobody there. There was like 4 people standing there watching them. And I was like, well, this is kind of cool. Okay. And then the same year I was in that high school, one of our friends decided, she was like, I want to go see this band. And all of us were the same thing. We're listening to Hard and Journey and Styx. And she's like, we're like, where? It was some club in Buffalo someplace. And we're like, who? And she said, no, they're great. They're called the Vapors. And that was the first punk band we ever saw. And they had that song, Turning Japanese. So we went to the smoky-filled club somewhere and saw the Vapors. That was my first like punk band. And after that I was like, no. I'm gonna go back to Hart and Kansas and Styx.
I mean, it did have a different sound.
Oh yeah.
Totally.
And that was what's this like? This was like 76. So this was when it's all starting. Right. With the Ramones and everybody, and the English ones. And it was just like, but that was like, we were just like, our friend loved it. We were like, ew, no, let's get out of here.
At what point did you get back to Florida?
We were up there for the 1 year, and then we hit the blizzard of Buffalo, the 76, 77 blizzard. My father was like, we're done. Turned around and came back. So I went to the same high school as a senior that I was in 10th grade. We moved to the same, they still like the west coast of Florida, so we were still living in the same area around Hudson in Port Richey. So I was in Hudson High School, so I went back to the same high school. And from there, they lived there all the way up until when I left to go to school, to go to Gainesville, to go to college. But I didn't play. I played all the way through high school. The year in between, before I went to college, I was in the Suncoast Sound Drum Corps for a year. Okay. And then really didn't do anything. And then after I was in Gainesville, that's when I met Audrey, and then the whole Atoms for Peace thing kind of started.
So what year round did you wind up going up to Gainesville?
I went up there in 1980. So I graduated in 78 from high school. So 79 and 80, the beginning of 80, I went to junior college for 2 years and then transferred to Gainesville in 80. So then I got into, I guess it was late 80, the beginning of 81, I got into nursing school because my theory was nursing always has a job if the band thing never works out. That's kind of one of the reasons I picked nursing. It's like, I know I'll always have a job and I can't afford, which at the beginning helped because it got me to afford my first, giant drum set.
It's a good backup plan.
Good backup plan.
No doubt. So when you got there, how quickly did you learn about what was going on there musically?
Probably not at the very beginning because I was concentrating on school. We really didn't go out to any clubs or anything. What happened was I met Audrey through a mutual friend of ours. I was playing on the, don't laugh. I was playing on the University of Florida women's rugby team. And there was a woman on that rugby team who was from South Florida and knew Audrey. And at some point, I guess Audrey came to like one of our games or something like that. And she introduced me. And that's kind of how I met Audrey. And I think none of us remember this well, right? Because it was so long ago. I think what happened was she found out I played drums. I hadn't really played then, since I had gotten there. And she said, I played guitar. So, yeah, we kind of talked about it. And she's like, we should start a band. So we actually started a women's band. I actually rented a storage unit in Gainesville. We carpeted it, the walls, and we decorated it and put posters up. And had another woman, I forgot, I think her name was Claire, played bass. Audrey was playing guitar. Had another woman who was a friend of another rugby player singing, and we were trying to play, covers and stuff like that. This obviously did not last very long. I think, like I said, I apologize to anybody who was there. I can't remember this correctly, but if I remember right, Audrey was playing guitar. She had taken her guitar to the music store where Tom Holtz worked to have it, and he fixed her guitar. And then she started talking to him about music, and Audrey was way more into music and way more into what was happening in bands, even way more than I was. So, she got really friendly with Tom, and, he'd work on her guitar. And then she said, oh, we started a women's band, and she brought him to a practice. And that's how I met Tom. So that just fizzled, that women's band didn't go anywhere. But Tom had seen us. So one thing led to another, and he invited us to come see this new band they had just formed called Atoms for Peace. And it was Chip and him. He had just joined them. I forgot the guy's name, was playing bass. George Tabb was playing rhythm guitar. And they had another guy, I forgot his name, that was playing drums. And they played, it wasn't the Metro yet downtown, but they played in that building. And Tom's like, yeah, you got to come see us. So Audrey and I was like, okay, that's like the first time I was ever in a punk bar, venue, club, anything. So we go watch them, and they were so bad. I'll never forget this. The drummer's Tom on his drum set fell off the drum set and rolled across the floor.
Wow.
It was horrible. And we were just like, oh my God.
What was their sound like at that time?
It was very punk more, because George was just coming out of Roach Motel, and that stuff was more like thrash punk. His idols were the Ramones, you know what I mean? So it was very thrashy, punky, a lot of noise, a lot of Chip screaming, through the whole thing. And Tom, who was like, way more melodic of a guitar player, was trying to like make like music out of it, sort of, on top of, George's like, guitar like going crazy and, bashy sounding, kind of stuff. But it was interesting. So we're like, okay, Audrey and I were like, okay, no. So we like, thank you for inviting us, and we leave. Well, right after that, they got rid of the bass player and the drummer. And so now they didn't have a bass player or a drummer. And Tom said, oh, I just met a drummer. So they asked me to come to one of their practices. And Audrey was like, but I play guitar. And they're like, well, we have guitar players. We don't need a guitar player. So she was upset that she didn't get invited too. So they said, but we fired the bass player. And so Audrey actually went out, bought a bass guitar. We had the same thing, a little cassette tape that we practiced on. She learned all the songs, then showed up, I brought her to one of the practices, and she played like everything like perfectly on the bass. And they were like, oh, we got a band. and that was it.
Wow. It's crazy how it came together so quickly.
Yeah, it was very, yeah.
Initial moment you saw them play. And we know just from that, the sound had changed. Now you have new members of the band that are in there. And also for those that have not checked out the episode with Audrey Silverman, it is available. You can check out that episode. I'll put it in the description of this one, as Audrey has been a guest as well. So you two now join the band, right? You're now a part of Atoms for Peace. What did you think of the name of the band?
We thought the name was pretty cool. What was funny was Audrey and I would talk, outside, like not at band practice. And when we first joined, we were like, what are we going to do? We don't play this kind of music. We didn't like that kind of thrashy, George Tabb, fueled kind of stuff, right? And we're just like, I don't know, it's like, I don't play that kind of stuff. I'm used to playing more like rock, and we were like, what are we going to do? But Audrey was like, she goes, look, we are now, 2 out of 5 in the whole like rhythm section. So, her thought was that we thought we could musically change them, over into something that was a little more not as rough and crazy and a little more melodic. And that's, kind of what happened. And George actually wrote like 2 or 3 of the songs that were, probably more, they weren't on, I don't think he wrote in them on the album. He wrote like 2 or 3 that we did that were actually, it was funny because they were actually like that. They weren't thrashy, Clash sounding, kind of stuff that he wrote. And he was a really good writer. But, he just wanted to stick with like, with like rhythm guitar, so he didn't play any melodies with it, sort of like, so we were like, oh no. And we saw Tom kind of struggling to like play melody, on top of everything else. And we're like, no, but there's the 3 of us can like turn this around and make it sound, more like, music sort of.
How are you getting along when it just came to the chemistry between Chip, when it came to George? Because they were new people to you,
Right.
right? You kind of met Tom through Audrey. You already knew Audrey first. So how did you feel like you clicked with George and Chip initially?
I think at the beginning we were we didn't, Audrey and I didn't say much, I think, because we were the new people sort of, joining like their band. And for me, I mean, for the whole time, I mean, I'm like notoriously just a follower, right? So I would just, and I'd never been in a band like that before. I'd never been in like a rock band before. My stuff was all, marching and, that kind of thing. So I just kind of like stayed in the background. It's like, okay, just, I'll do what you tell me, I'll be quiet. Y'all take over and make all the decisions and decide what we're doing and everything. Chip, I would say, was a very strong personality, I guess I'll put it that way. Had very definite ideas because he did write most of all the words for everything, so he had this kind of like, Jim Morrison sort of, I'm the poet turning it into music, kind of thing. But the words were like awesome, but he was very adamant about, how this would go and how to do things. I think, like I said, I wasn't around much with the reactions between the rest of them, except me. Tom and Audrey kind of were off to the side, sort of. I think he got along okay with George. I think they kind of argued over like form, kind of thing, and and how that was going to go. I mean, we liked what George wrote. I don't think everybody was kind of thrilled with how George played it, sort of. Just different, like two genres trying to mesh. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It was like that wasn't his thing, and ultimately. When I get that part of the story, we did get a gig after the album we had done came out. We did play my claim to fame is I played at CBGB's. And George is originally from New York City. So when we went up there, and he'd been in Florida for quite a few years, with Roach Motel and everything. So when we went up there to play CBGB's, he stayed there and quit the band. So when we came back, it was just the four of us.
Did you all see that coming, or was it a surprise?
I don't really remember. I think it was kind of a surprise that he didn't come back, and he just wanted to stay up there and focus on. I think that's what did it. I think he was just so into that kind of music, and then after that, he really hooked up. He actually was friends with the Ramones. I mean, he actually hooked up with them and made his own band up there. Oh my God, I forgot the name of it. Curious George. He started a band in New York, and that was more his scene. I think he had missed it, being in Florida the whole time. That was his thing was like, punk in New York and where it started kind of. And he just decided to stay there. I don't think anybody was really surprised, sort of, when we came back. But other than that, it's like, and I think between Audrey also has a very strong personality. She did clash with Chip on some stuff, but it was more, I think, both of them are very creative. So I think that's kind of where they like clashed a little bit, as in how, some stuff should go or be done. But in the end, I mean, we would always come out with, because we were writing all of our own stuff. We hardly played any covers. So we were writing I'm trying to come up with drum parts, like Tom would come in with a line, he would actually work with Chip and try to match his lyrics. So Tom would sit there and work with Chip on something. They'd come up with a song and then they'd bring it to us. And then Audrey would put in a bass part, and then I would try to add, drum stuff to it. It kind of went like that. So it was very mutual, I think, building the songs. That part, I think, was interesting because a couple of the songs we did a couple of them. I can't remember which one they were now. We did a couple of them, I swear to God, in 20 minutes. Which you've probably heard other people who write songs say that. It's like their hits are like, they did it in like 10 minutes, on the piano kind of thing. And that's what happened. I think the songs that were the best, it didn't struggle over them. I mean, they were written in like half an hour and it's like, oh, we got a new song.
Some of those things just come quickly, and those are the ones that usually are the most well received in some cases. So
right, definitely.
When you started playing with Atoms for Peace and you think about some of those early shows, I know you mentioned that they were already playing at places like the Metro.
Yeah.
What other venues were around back then? Or maybe they weren't venues per se. Maybe they could have been just bars or other types of places that had live music from time to time. What were some of those places you remember playing with Atoms for Peace, and just some memories of some of those early shows?
Yeah, it was interesting in Gainesville. It's like punk / alternative was still like new to there. I mean, this is like the early 80s. So what would happen was we had a hard time finding places to play that let you play original music. Everybody wanted the band to show up and do, 3 hours of covers and rock and like whatever, right? So it was hard to get in anywhere that would let you do that. So the places that did were basically dumps, right? That had a following of like, young, either punks or people into our music, that would come, but the venues were not, spectacular. So like I said, the Metro a lot. We played the American Legion Hall 2 or 3 times. We actually played the Melody Club once. any place that would let us play our own music.
Were you all calling? Were you calling to try to get booked at these places? Like, how was that getting cared for?
We had a couple people. I know when I watched Audrey's podcast with you, she mentioned this too. One of our issues the whole time in Amateur Peace is we had no management. There was not like a manager. I mean, we had a couple guys that were kind of helping us out, and they would call around, or Chip would do it, and basically, and try and arrange stuff. But we really didn't have any representation out there pushing us, sort of. So it was hard to none of us know what we're doing, sort of, you know what I mean? So they were trying to do it on their own. They would call places. Like I said, the lack of management, didn't, help anything. I will say the biggest show we played with the most people in it to date, like now, even still, was we played a show at the Rathskeller on the UF campus before it burned down, obviously. And it was 3 bands. I forgot who the third was. It was us. We played with 3 Blind Mice a lot from Jacksonville. We played in Jacksonville Beach a couple of times at another dump, right? It was called the Blighted Area, which was this cement block kind of holy, messy building right on the beach, like in the sand, like on the beach. I'll never forget this because they had a cement stairs that went to the top floor where the bands played, like straight up, and all of us killed ourselves hauling equipment up this giant flight of cement stairs.
You got some of the most heavy equipment with the drum kit and all that. So.
Well, drums, and we had a huge. Tom had gotten a huge system. So we had these giant speakers and amps. I mean, oh God, just like tons and tons of equipment. So we played at the Blighted Area a couple times. The Rathskeller was the biggest show. I think it was over 500 people that showed up to that one. That was probably the biggest one we did. But yeah, same thing. It was like hard because same thing. Like I said, trying to do it ourselves. People trying to call. No real management. When we did the album finally, we paid for the whole thing ourselves. We did it at Mirror Image Studios in Gainesville. They pressed.
That was with Bob. That was with Bob McPeek.
Correct. We had made cassette tapes before then, kind of as demo tapes, but nothing like seriously recorded. So once we had done the album, we we're trying to promote it. So we had paid for 5,000 copies to be pressed, which now you can't find any of them. I have 2. Every once in a while, trip over them in a remote little record store someplace, But so like I said, we had no promotion and no management. So what we did was once we got all the albums, I had a little pickup truck that I used to put all the drums and stuff in, and carry the equipment in. So Chip and I drove around the Southeast in my little pickup truck handing out albums. So we went to Athens, Georgia, like where REM had just, started. There was a record store there that was popular in Athens, that played their stuff. We handed up to them. We drove to Columbia, South Carolina, like all over the place, just handing out records. And I don't know who arranged it. This is a really weird story. So, and somebody got us an appointment with their guy who looks for new bands. And they had just signed REM not long before that, and a couple other bands at the time. And we actually, I'll never forget this, we actually drove to the building. It was an office building, in the middle of Atlanta, the middle of nowhere kind of thing. And it was just Chip and I. And we had a bunch of albums, and we went into their offices. The guy let us in the office. He sat us down. He played the album to hear it. I don't think he'd heard it before. And he played the first song, which was Cry, right? So he's listening to it. And he listened to a couple songs, and he was like really interested. And what happened was, this is the problem with no agent, right? Chip got nervous and wouldn't stop talking. And he talked us right out of there. The guy was like, I'm not going to deal with this. And that was it. That was as close as we got.
Wow.
I'm kicking him under the table, like, would you please stop talking? Because he was explaining, like, how he wrote the songs and how he was influenced and why he wrote this and why he wrote that. He just got nervous, you know, and he was just trying to, like, over-explain it. And I'm like, let the guy listen to the music.
Was this Chip's first?
It was just Chip and me,
Was this his first go-around with a band like this?
I think so. I'm not sure what he did before that. I have no idea if he was in anything else before. I don't think so. I think he had met George somehow, and that kind of started it, and they just were like writing songs or something together. I think that's what started it. But we needed somebody that knew what they were doing when it got to that level. We just were too dumb to realize it and have somebody else go in there and like bring the album, not us.
Exactly.
You know, it was like I saw us like, you know, go like this, like, oh, look, we might make it. Oh my God, we're going to get a record deal. Oh, not anymore. That was it.
I've heard a lot of stories where those kinds of situations occur, and they're all varying situations, but something occurs, and that's it. So I know when Audrey came on, she gave her side of what it was like recording at Mirror Image with Bob. What was your experience like?
I do have a few pictures of that, like remaining, probably the ones that I probably took. I think Audrey and I went in and did our parts fairly quickly, if I remember right. But Chip and Tom were in there a lot, like into 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, because we all had jobs. Everybody's working through all this. You know, nobody's just hanging out being a musician yet. We're all doing, you know, we all have a job. So like after work, you know, they would go and just be in there forever, you know, like hashing parts out and, you know, and way more into it. And then Audrey and I'd show up and like play our parts and like leave. It's like, okay, we're done. We got it on the first couple takes, and now we're like, you know, out of here. We hung out a little bit, but it wasn't like, it's funny because even back then, I'm not a drinker at all. Kind of never was, you know. I did in college, but you know. So there's the only picture of me in that is I'm laying on the floor and Chip is dumping a beer into my mouth. But you know, like we're like this is a party band and we're in the studio, you know, kind of thing. Like we're partying and drinking like crazy, and it's really kind of funny because it's like, no, that's really not the way it went. But it was interesting. They were in there way longer and spent more time on it, I think, than we did.
Sure.
Couple of the songs. I know Audrey and I were not happy with how they came out, sort of, because unbeknownst to us, we would think they were cool and we thought we were done. And then in the times that they were spending all these hours in there, they were overdubbing stuff. So then we'd hear it, we'd be like, what happened there? All of a sudden there was all this, you know, excessive stuff, you know, and these are the recording studios back then. I mean, not like they are now, obviously. You know, we were trying to add sound effects and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It was kind of chintzy sounding, sort of, and we were just like, you know, like, what happened?
Yeah, and that's something that, as you listen to the music that's on the album, that was one of the things I always wondered when I had Audrey on originally was there a demo that had some different variations of what those songs may have sounded like before you recorded them in the studio? Were there other rough mixes of those tracks, or was that just the very first time that you all recorded them?
No, probably like a couple just, you know, cassette tapes. Because I mean, that's what we would practice with. That's what Audrey had wound up with when she joined the band. Was we gave her a practice tape that had like, I don't know, 3 songs on it or something. You know, so there was a couple of like, you know, cassette tapes people had made, you know, kind of out there, but nothing like official. You know, there wasn't anything official until we actually went and made the album. So there wasn't a lot of recordings of anything. I heard recently, because you were mentioning before, I'm on the Gainesville punk page. You know, it's still in Gainesville, and every once in a while I'll pop in there and say, does anybody have, like I said, I'm still looking for pictures of us. I'll go on there and say, does anybody have any pictures of Atoms for Peace? And people will answer me and be like, oh, I remember them, and that's kind of it. And then one time, not that long ago, one woman actually answered, and she's like, oh yeah, she goes, I was there when y'all made the video. I'm like, oh no, like really? It's like, where would that be? Nobody knows.
Right. Well, talk about the video. What was the video for?
I have no idea. You know, this woman answered and said, oh, I was there because she had done something. She broke her arm or broke her leg or something like that. She was either on crutches or had a cast, something like that. That's how she remembered it. And she's like, yeah, I think my arm was still in a cast or something like that. And she's like, yeah, I was there. And I think it was at the Metro. And she's like, yeah, I was there when you were all making a video. I'm like, I don't remember that at all. It's one of those like brain cells that left.
It's always interesting, though, to hear other people's perspectives and how they saw different moments like that through their own lens. Because even
Right.
though you could have both been in the same place at the exact same time, for whatever reason, especially you fast forward however many years it's been, right? 30, 40 plus
Right,
years.
exactly. I'm still friends with Audrey. I joke with her. I'm like, between the two of us, we sort of have one brain remembrance of this. Because I'll say, no, you remember when we went and did this? And she'd be like, no. And then she'd be like, no, we did this. I'll be like, no. So it's like, it is. It's from your own, only perspective.
Right.
And one of the stories that's funny that we still don't agree on is when we managed to get to New York City, when we played at CBGB's, and we played on but they had bands every night. I mean, it didn't matter if it was a weekend or not. They had 4 or 5 bands every single night of the week. And we played on a Tuesday, but we were like the 3rd or 4th band in. I guess it was supposed to be like, getting to better bands, supposedly. And when we finally got to play, so we're up there, and the same thing happened. We all got so nervous that I remember, I think it was Audrey and I, or me and Tom, I forgot what happened. 2 of us started one song, and the other 2 started a different one. And it was like, oh no, something's wrong. Like what happened again? Because we were just so nervous. So we got over it, and we got pulled it together and played a cool set. And that's how I remember. And Audrey swears that Chip got in a fist fight with I think it was either with Tom or with George. And I was like, I don't remember them doing that, or arguing probably, but not. So that's one we have a memory lapse on that one. I'm like, I just don't remember them doing that. They very well could have, you know what I mean? And it's just like, It's so funny because it's like, oh, okay, I don't remember that part. But
Did you all
that was our claim
drive?
to fame with CBGB's.
Did you all drive up to New York for that show?
Well, that was actually very interesting. So the guys flew, the girls drove the truck. I'm not sure how that came about. I was trying to think of this earlier. If I remember, like, again, my memory is like, not all there. I think what happened was, so before we went, we knew we were going like a long time before we went, trying to plan this trip, right? So I had been driving the equipment around in my little pickup truck. So of course that's how I had to get the stuff up there. We had to drive it to New York City. So Audrey and I drove the truck. I remember we stopped overnight in Virginia and then went the rest of the way into New York City because George's parents lived in the West Village in a basement apartment in like a, brownstone. And we stayed with them and like slept on their, floor in their front room, kind of thing. So that's where we had, trying to get to. But in Gainesville, there was this is going to sound really weird and not connected to anything, but there was a dance contest at some club, with like punk dance kind of things. And some friend, it was a couple, man and a woman, a couple that was a friend of Chip's, won it. They won the dance contest. And the first prize was 4 tickets to New York City because there was a bigger one there. Like, you know what I mean? At the same time, that's how we went up there at the same time. So they had won these tickets to go do the dance off, whatever, big thing in New York City. So they had 4 tickets and there was the 2 of them. So they took Chip and Tom with them on the plane. Audrey and I wound up in the truck driving all the way.
That's crazy that
I know
how it worked out.
Yeah, that was interesting. And it was funny because we took all the equipment out of the truck and put it in their basement, in George's parents' basement, and then there was no place to park the truck. Because this is New York City, I don't know where I am, there's like, so I remember Tom had to go with me. We had to rent a parking space in a garage on the dock, like the dock next to the East River. And between the West Village and the dock, where the car was not cool sort of neighborhood, right? So, Tom would go with me every time we had to go get the truck. So we basically parked it there and left it there. Then it was time to play because we were there like a week and a half, the whole time. When it was time for the night that came that we played, we had to go all the way back over there, get the truck, come back, load it up, drive it to where CBGB's was in the East Village and also not a great area. I remember, taking the equipment out of the truck and stepping over people. Some winos passed down on the sidewalk, right in front of the building. And then I was like panic. I mean, oh my God, where am I going to put my truck? I think we parked it somewhere. I forgot where, but yeah, it was a thing. And then we had to take the equipment, back to their place and do the same thing again because we weren't coming home yet. It was like a big deal with the truck and the equipment back and forth. And when we got there to unload it, I was like, are you sure this is the right bar?
Right.
This doesn't look good.
How would you compare the audience of the CBGB show to a typical audience at a Gainesville show?
I can tell you exactly how many people were at CBGB's. 13.
Wow.
That was it. Yeah, none. All of our friends and like 13 people.
Were there other bands on the bill for that same
Yeah.
show?
There was like, they always had like 4 or 5 a night. Like I said, we were on a Tuesday. I don't remember who they were or anything, or if they have any more people come. We were kind of like the third or the fourth sort of, in the night. And I guess they started, like sort of headlining-ish, up the rank sort of. We were close to the top, but yeah, no, nobody saw us. Or recorded it again, like, here we go. Yeah, same thing, no pictures, no. I do, you've heard stories about this. I do remember the disgusting bathroom at CBGB's. That's famous, and it's disgusting as you would imagine, and it looked like that was true.
Was it just one bathroom for everyone?
Yes, with no doors or anything. It was like,
Oh no,
there's like a toilet in the corner. Go for it.
that's the worst, Nancy.
Oh yeah, it was bad.
Oh boy. So were the bathrooms any better in Gainesville?
Oh yes, even in the bad bars, the bathrooms were better.
Okay.
It was really interesting because at one point I told you we practiced in the barn thing. The way that come about is, so Chip was the manager of an apartment complex, and the guy that owned the property owned the land. It was way out by I forgot what road it is. It might be 39th Ave maybe, and like I-75. There was nothing out there. Right, it was like all farmland, and the guy had an apartment complex, owned the property on like the south side of 39th, and across the street on the north side, he owned all that property, which is more like a farmland, like with actual crops and corn and stuff on it, and he had a huge building, outbuilding with like farm equipment and tractors, this kind of stuff, and then there was this one little building that was empty. And Chip would have to go over there and get the lawnmower and stuff from them to come over and cut the grass and stuff around the apartments across the street. So all the equipment was over there. So he asked the guy, he was like, well, can we use this empty building? And it had one electrical pole outside of it with like a plug on it. There was no electricity in the building. It was basically 4 walls, and that was it, and a roof, and sort of waterproof, but not really. And that's where we practiced. So that's how we wound up, this is like, it could have been on a documentary, right? Like we started, like I said before, same thing with like the Leonard Skinner shack in the, in Gainesville. This is like the same, in Jacksonville, this is kind of the same thing. But yeah, it was too funny. That's where we wound up, practicing. But at some point, God, who was it? It wasn't Chip, because he had an apartment there because he took care of the apartment complex. But some of the guys, it wasn't, I forgot who it wasn't. It wasn't Tom. Some of the people that would hang out with us, I guess, 2 of them wound up renting. There was a room above the metro, like a loft, like you'd see in New York, like open, with like pillars in it. And it had a bathroom and had like a little kitchenette. And some of our friends, or 2 people, wound up renting that to live in it. And there was stairs in the back of the metro on the inside that went up to it, right? So it was just, they turned it into like a little apartment. And we wound up moving everything out of the barn and moving it up there to practice. So we wound up actually practicing over the top of the metro.
Wow. Were you getting a lot of gigs there too, just because it was nearby?
We played at the metro quite a bit because I think they were friends with the owner at the time, and that was a big deal. Nobody knows anymore what a bottle club is. And that's what the metro was. So they didn't serve alcohol. They only served mixers. So you could buy, a Coke and 7-Up and, whatever, but you brought your own liquor. So people brought wine, brought liquor, whatever. And so, which is why they kind of somehow got around the liquor laws by being open. That's why they could be open later too. So they were open till like 2 or 3 in the morning. For whatever weird rules, bottle clubs had or something like that. So when we played there even more, because then we were like, we didn't, all we had to do is bring the drums like down the stairs. We were like already there. So
right.
Yeah, we played at the metro quite a bit. And that was we had pretty good crowds in there too. I mean, people were like, that was more of a place where people danced more, I'd say, than the other clubs sort of, that got more into it. And then by that time, the album had come out too. So then it was like, we started getting, more and more recognition. And then that's when everything kind of went, that was kind of it. That's what.
Were Were you bringing the record with you to the gigs, and did they sell it all at that time at
I
some of the
don't
shows?
remember. I don't think so.
Okay.
I remember there was a bunch of albums. We gave a bunch of albums to was it Hide and Zeke's Records? Um, they had a bunch of them. I think we would just tell kind of to people where to go get them. We weren't like handing them out, kind of thing. That I remember. And no like tapes from it. You know what I mean? It wasn't like any like handouts as far as I can remember. Like we didn't make any like cassettes and hand them out. That kind of that. The
Right.
only cassettes I remember were, like I said, the ones we had for practice. Not to like sell any or anything like that. But
Sure. What about in terms of some of the different local publications at the time, whether it was a fanzine or some kind of Gainesville paper of some kind or newspaper, what have you? Was there any write-ups on the band or any mentions at all that you can remember from that time?
yes, and I have it. I tried to find it for our podcast today, and of course, now when I want to put my hands on it, I can't find it. When I'm looking for something else, I'll find it. They did do an article on us as soon as the album came out in the Gainesville Sun. So we have a very big picture of us and a really nice article. They compared us to REM and Love Tractor. I don't know if you remember them. The bands that were coming out of Athens.
Right.
And I remember the title of the article was "Atoms for Peace is Writing a Rock Renaissance." That was the name of the article. I still have it someplace. Like I said, I trip over it every once in a while. I got to find it again. But yeah, it gave a really nice write-up. And it was so funny because what I remember of it, when they were talking about Tom's guitar playing, and they would compare us to what it would sound like. And they compared me to the drummer from the Talking Heads.
Were you listening to bands like the Talking Heads too?
At that time, yeah. I mean, at this point, there was no more Journey, Heart, or Kansas, or Styx, or nothing like that. And actually, I would say my biggest influence on switching to different kinds of music was Audrey, because I mean, she listened to all kinds of stuff and was more into like more progressive stuff than I was. And that's how I first heard. She's the first person that played me the first Cure song I ever heard. I still tease her today that when we drove to New York to CBGB's, she had one Cure, like the first Cure cassette tape that we listened to the entire way, over and over and over.
Wow.
I have that one memorized. But yeah, at the time, so then I obviously more listened to, we were listening to more like, the Cure, Talking Heads, Psychedelic Furs, that kind of stuff. Susie and the Banshees.
You hear some of these different bands that you're talking about, elements of their sound in Atoms for Peace, because there was a little bit of that kind of art rock, new wave, but not over the top, punk, but not, again, aggressive in any kind of way. But the lyrics themselves felt punk, in
Right.
in some respects. So how did you feel the band's sound was received by those that were checking out the band, and also the lyrics, and how did you kind of see them?
I think people at the time, like I said, we were playing in all these places that were more punk focused. You know what I mean? Like more Ramones sounding and then we would play and people would be like, people literally would like stop and be like, wait a minute, this is not, thrash, punk sounding. But I think the music went over really well. I think people were surprised that it sounded, we knew we were that good, but, people were just like, oh, I think we took a lot of people by surprise in Gainesville anyway. You know what I mean? That we were that good. And it was like, and it started to expand like that. And then more and more people would come see us, because then it kind of switched from the punk crowd more into like the goth sort of alt rock people more, you know what I mean? Because that's more kind of what we sounded like. But I think they were kind of like I said, surprised that it was like, that it was that good. And, and we tried to vary it some, so not every song sounded kind of the same. We threw in a couple punky kind of stuff we hang on to, like Peace Gun is still pretty, to this day, I probably cannot play that anymore. It's still too fast. There's a couple, but for the most part,
that was a George Tabb song. Peace
yeah.
Gun.
So yeah, like I said, we kept a couple of them, but for the most part, and the lyrics were, I don't know, when you really listen to them, the interesting thing is, my feeling has always been that um, if we got together, obviously, unfortunately, rest in peace, Chip is no longer with us. If we would have gotten together again today, we'd have been popular. Because I really think the music and the lyrics time lasted. Stuff comes around and comes around, even with those kinds of lyrics. Because it was very, I mean, Chip started out, I think it was very political. It was very, that's why he picked Adams for Peace for the name. Oppressive politics and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of the lyrics are like, wrapped around that kind of thing. But like I said, stuff comes around and comes around and comes around. I said, you could probably play these songs today and they'd still be popular. I think they had very good staying value, just based
Right.
on, how they were written and just the music. After the album came out, like I said, we were doing really well, but then that's when Audrey left and came back to South Florida. So we tried to go on after that. We got another bass player. I forgot his name. I think his name was Kenny. He was a known bass player in Gainesville. So got another bass player. We had gigs coming up, if I remember right, because we played in Tampa after that with him, with the other bass player. We played in a couple other places, and it just wasn't the same thing. Because I mean, we were unique, and that we had, after George left, I mean, we were unique with like 2 guys and 2 women. That wasn't popular anywhere. You just didn't see that really, and that's what made it unique too. And it was kind of, I mean, I was obviously still playing drums, but that whole thing was kind of gone, So we played a couple that we were booked for, and then that was kind of it. It just faded after that.
Do you remember some of the places you played in Tampa?
Oh God, I don't remember what we played in. One bar. I don't remember where it was. It was near Ybor City, I might want to say. I
That
don't
makes
remember the
sense.
name of it.
Was it a
I think we
different?
played again in Jacksonville one time. But yeah, that was kind of it. Didn't really play a lot around anywhere else.
Sure. What were those scenes like from what you can remember when you did get a chance to play in, let's say, Jacksonville or Tampa?
Jacksonville, we got very well received in Jacksonville because I think we played a couple times with the same band, the ones that came to play at the Rathskeller with us. Because Three Blind Mice was from Jacksonville. I think they played with us at the Blighted area a couple times. But decent sized crowd. It was like it's weird because back then all this music was just kind of starting, and I think a lot of people weren't sure, about it yet, kind of. So, like I said, not overwhelming crowds. I mean, the people that would show up expecting to hear something else and then heard us were like, oh, they're really cool. I really like this sound. After they'd see us, sort of, you know what I mean? But it
Right.
wasn't like people came to see us, if that makes sense.
It does.
Same thing with we went as a band. We actually all went to Jacksonville as Adams for Peace. We went to see U2 because they played it, and they were like newish too. There was a story I never when we played at the Rathskeller. I think Tom told us the story because Tom had owned this huge, like I said before, this huge sound system. So when we weren't using it, he would rent it to bands that would come through. Like the Rathskeller was bringing in people like from the outside, like not major bands, but like people touring ish. They'd play at the Rathskeller. So he would rent them the sound system. So they didn't have to drag it with them kind of thing, right? And they would call ahead to these little towns and get somebody to come set up the sound system. So one time he did the sound. He set up the sound system and did the sound for U2 because he said they showed up at a station wagon.
Wow.
So yeah, but yeah, there was quite a few bands that went through like that.
Oh, I bet. And throughout the entire existence of Atoms for Peace, did your family ever make it out to any of the shows, or perhaps some of your friends from back home? Did they know what you were doing?
They knew what I was doing. My parents came and saw us when we played in Tampa. The one show after Audrey had left. They never saw us before that. That was the only time because they were still living in Port Richey, so they drove down to Tampa to see us play. That was the only time they ever saw me play. Other than what I would tell them. But yeah, they would come up to Gainesville every once in a while. But at that point, they were getting older and didn't want to travel much. But yeah, they did come see us in Tampa. That was if I remember right, that's the only time they saw me play.
Okay. Were you excited to share with them the record that you were on? Because how cool is that? Not everybody has a vinyl record of them playing in a band. Did you have that moment at all when you were able to share that?
Yeah, my mother was very excited about it. Like I said, my father was not like the musical side of the family, so he was kind of like, no, that's nice what you're doing, but whatever, right? But since she was the musician, she was very excited about it. She'd tell all her friends in the community that her daughter was in a. It was funny because they kind of didn't care what I did as long as I stayed in school. So as long as you finish nursing school, now we don't kind of, and I did. I finished nursing school and I got a job at the VA in Gainesville right away. So all this Adams P stuff was going around me working, but I never stopped, working. So as long as I did that, they didn't care. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to go be in a band. They've been like, no, you're not.
Well, it's great that you were able to still finish and
Right.
get all that accomplished. Once Atoms for Peace ended, how much longer did you stay up in Gainesville, and did you do anything else musically after that?
Um, I stayed in Gainesville till 1990. Because the album came out in 84. 85 maybe we played through. 86 into 87 was maybe when I was with Tom and John Holmes doing Flesh Castanets, and then after that kind of nothing. So I left Gainesville in 1990 and I moved to Maryland,
Okay.
right outside of DC.
The Flesh Castanets.
Yes.
Was that already an established band, or did you all form that band together?
No, we formed it together after Atoms for Peace because Tom had known John Holmes for like a long time as a bass player in other bands. I'm not sure he ever played with them in any other band, but I mean, they knew each other because Tom knew everybody because he worked at the music store. So he knew everybody that came in, to get instruments or talk to people or he was a big buddy with Bo Diddley because he would come into the store all the time. So he knew more people that way musically, right? And that's how actually I think how Tom met probably. That's how he met Nancy Luca because she was one of the ones that had a women's band at the time, right before we started Atoms for Peace. So that's kind of how he knew all these music people. So he wanted to keep doing something. So he got John Holmes interested in me. So it was just the three of us that came up with Flesh Castanets, which I know is a weird name.
It is definitely a unique name for sure. And you all put out a demo cassette, which I've only seen the outer part of it. I've never actually seen the cover. What do you remember about the demo? Where did you record it and how many songs? Like, do you remember any details from it?
I hardly remember any songs we did off of it at all, to tell you the truth, because I don't think we were together long enough, sort of. I want to say we just recorded it in, I'm trying to think, somebody's living room. It wasn't it wasn't a studio. It wasn't. It was just made with at that and John was very into tech stuff. So he had more like equipment and recording stuff and that kind of thing. I think we just made it, practicing in his living room, from what I remember.
It's interesting that I've never come across a physical copy. I've only seen that one picture.
Right.
And did you all play a lot of shows, or were you at least playing some gigs in the area?
We played a couple. Same thing. We played a couple times at the Metro. I do have one picture of me and Tom and half of John playing at the Metro. I'm trying to think where else we played. It didn't go very far. I mean, we only were together maybe a little over a year. And by the time we practiced enough to play out someplace, it was almost like the same problem. Nobody wanted original music anywhere still, even after Atoms for Peace. So it was hard to get places to play sort of, but I don't remember it lasting very long at all.
How would you describe the sound of the band?
It was probably a little more ethereal sounding, kind of like a little less constructed sort of. I know John Holmes was a big fan of King Crimson. So we were concentrating on not reproducing them, but that kind of sound. So it was a little more, the word I want is more floaty sounding, kind of, not as structured, sort of.
Also, I feel like with that kind of music too, like that more prog rock, it can come with more
Right.
technical aspects of it too. Did you feel like as time went on, you were becoming an even more proficient drummer?
What I did was kind of cheat. So at the time, this was like there wasn't electronic drum sets out yet, but I had the first time was with not in Adams for Peace. I had a regular drum set, but in Flesh Castanets, I bought what was called. It was the first electronic thing they had come out with. Roland made it. It was called an octopad, and it had 8 pads on it. Basically, a big metal thing with like 4 square rubber pads on it, and you plugged it into a little brain. And it had different tom sounds. It had percussion sounds. You could do like timbali sounds or a cowbell or a tambourine, all this kind of stuff. That was like the first thing of that had come out. So what I did was I liked still the live. I didn't like the electronic drums at that time had a hard time reproducing cymbal sounds, like actual crash cymbals and like the hi-hat. Very bad. I mean, they just could not get it at all. So I kept the live cymbals and the bass drum and the snare drum. And then I just played on the octopad, which like why I say that's cheating is like you can sound really good on these electronic drums because you don't have to move far. You can do all these great rolls and everything back and forth because you're only going about 6 inches one way or the other.
Right.
But in Flesh Castanets, I used that, so it gave us a little more room to do a little more experimental sounds, and stuff like that on it. And then you could like add reverb to it, and this kind of stuff. So that was the kind of the beginning of that. That's how it sounded a little bit different.
Okay. That's interesting to hear. So
Yeah.
Flesh Castanets, not a band that was around for very long.
No.
You did document it in some way, which is
Right.
great if you can find a copy of that.
Right. Tom may have one. I don't know.
Okay. And just as far as the relationship, because now you were mentioning even prior to that, you had moved north to the DC area, right?
Right.
And I imagine the other members of the band were still living their lives. So did you all remain in touch? Like, how did that work as far as the relationship with both bands, Atoms for Peace and Flesh Castanets?
Not with John Holmes so much. I mean, once I moved, I kind of really didn't, catch up with him at all. But I've stayed in contact with Tom. And then over the years, not so much. And then we would catch up a little bit every once in a while. And now, of course, now back then, nobody even had a cell phone, right? So now that you can, text people, whatever like that, it's like every once in a while I get a text from him or I'll send him a text. Audrey and I actually went to Gainesville last February and saw him. She hadn't seen him since Atoms for Peace. And that was the first time the 3 of us were together.
Wow.
Because he's playing with Nancy Luca's band. She's in California, but every once in a while she goes back to Gainesville and she's got people she plays with in Gainesville. And they just play, like cover stuff, like wherever. But she's got Tom playing with her, playing guitar with her. So we had gone to see her band play with him. So that was the first time we had seen him. But I've kept up with Tom over the years. And obviously, and Audrey, I was living near in South Florida. Because we actually, a few years ago, we actually had a cover band with us in South Florida called She'll Be Apples. Another weird name. And we same thing. We played cover stuff. And that band, I did buy an entire electronic set and use that. So I still didn't use a regular, drum set. But yeah, no, I kept in touch with, we didn't learn about Chip until like a few years after it happened because we had all kind of lost touch with each other for a while. And it wasn't until I went to Gainesville a few years ago to see Nancy Luca was back again. I went to go see her, and I still have friends there that I, worked with, at the hospital. So I have a good friend I'm still in contact with. I used to work with, and I went to see her, and then go see Nancy Luca. And one of the guys, his name's Dean Jordan, was helped us a lot in Atoms for Peace, like our slash roadie helper. It would help us call bars and arrange stuff, kind of like an all around, kind of guy, helping us out. And he came to see Nancy Luca too. So I was talking to him, and that's how I found out about Chip. So he finally, told me, what happened, and we had no idea. And I don't remember when it was. It's been a few years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice that you've been able to maintain a relationship, obviously with Audrey, for however many years it's been now.
I know.
And you mentioned seeing Tom and that reunion, which I'm sure had to feel in some ways surreal. I mean, you think back to all these years going back, especially for Audrey, hadn't not seen Tom in so long. So What was the feeling like when you all finally were all together in the same room after all this time? And it just, what was that like?
It was. You're right. It was pretty surreal. After we saw that, we didn't talk to them too much because they were playing, obviously, with the place they were playing at. But afterwards that night, we went out to dinner and tracked down Tom, and he met us for dinner so that we could actually, sit down and like talk to him. And it's so funny because remember I mentioned before how I remember something, Audrey doesn't. Audrey remembers something, I don't. Tom started with, "You remember when this happened?" And Audrey and I were like, "No." So it's like we didn't expand our memories much by adding Tom because it was pretty funny. But yeah, it was nice though. I mean, it's like the fact that all these years. I mean, I don't know what happened. It was like I feel like this stuff happened yesterday, and it's like 40 years ago. It's like, how did that happen?
Right.
And Tom's doing what he always wanted to do. He worked in a music store and wanted to play his guitar. That's all he ever did. And then he retired, and now he tells us now he just gets Social Security and still plays guitar.
Okay.
And he never left Gainesville. But
Wow.
that was his
So
thing. He never wanted to do anything else. But he's still playing guitar.
he is a Gainesville lifer.
Yep, definitely.
Because
But
you
yeah,
think
it
about,
was nice. It was nice to see him.
it's good. It's nice that you were able to all connect like that. Did Tom share any memories or anything that he had opinions on as far as the legacy of the band when you were kind of reliving some of those times?
No, I mean nothing that really stands out. We talked about the making the album. We talked about like I said, the biggest show we had was at the Rathskeller. So we were talking about that and how that came about, and what happened before and during and after that kind of thing, and just in like stuff that happened in general and the places we played, just kind of reminiscing, what happened. But yeah, just the fun stuff we remember. Even the short time we actually had a band. I mean, Animals for Peace wasn't together that long. It was probably maybe at the most maybe 3 years of that, which is like a drop in time. But
Well, at the same time, 3 years for, I don't want to classify Adam Freeze as a punk band, but in
right,
that era,
yeah,
3 years is pretty long.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we had a lot of great experiences. That was, like I said, that was my first experience in an actual band.
True.
So that was, yeah, it was different.
Did anyone at all catch up with George Tabb over the years?
He was on my Facebook page. He stayed in New York City. As he's a couple years younger than us, I think. He's always stayed in touch in New York City. He's always been, lives near the East Village, was friends with all the Ramones, and recently, I mean, he was on my Facebook page. I messaged him not recently, maybe a couple of years ago. And I think all of a sudden we haven't really seen anything from him. His apartment was right near ground zero for 9/11. And their apartment got kind of covered in, toxic dust, sort of. And I think he got sick from it and was battling, I don't know what. I wouldn't know. He never, really said, what
Right.
it was. But some long-term something chronic, something not good something. And I wonder, because now we really haven't seen. He posts stuff every once in a while. We would see it. But the last couple of years, nothing. But I know he got married. He had a girlfriend for many, many, many years. They finally got married. I think her name is Elaine. And they have 2 Yorkies. Because he would post pictures of their apartment, and stuff like that. So, the punk guy sort of retired with his
Right.
wife and Yorkies.
But you think back to those early times when you had no way to stay connected, right? You mentioned there were no cell phones, there was no real way. And now
Right.
and it's been around for a bit now. You think about just the way social media allows you those opportunities to see those photos, to get a glimpse at people's lives all these years later. Otherwise, you wouldn't know about the Yorkies, right?
Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, it's
So,
interesting because you talk about, I mean, what we went through in recording, I mean, it wasn't like the 60s or the 70s kind of recording, an album, but I mean, we went to a studio. It was on reel-to-reel tape. I had connected with Bob McPeek actually a couple of years ago, trying to get my hands on the master tapes. And he had a fire in the studio at one point, and that was the end of the master tapes.
Oh no.
Yeah, they're gone. So, but just the whole process. I mean, it took us forever to record. Like I said, we recorded pieces because we're all working. So I'd go when I could, and Audrey would go when she could, and then they would go and be there late when they came. So as it came, as it came together, working on it is a process, right? And it's so funny because now it's like, what do you just go on Spotify and make a record?
That would be something.
So not the same.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, but you think about just the way you can access some of the music of Atoms for Peace, unless you have the vinyl record, there is a copy you can listen to and stream on YouTube, but that's probably about it. I don't think there's any other places you can find it unless you're aware of where those are.
No. A few years ago, Audrey had it. Well, the first thing I did was for very many years, all we had was the record, right? All we had was the vinyl. And this is, again, probably 15 years ago. So for 1 year, I was living in Hollywood. So it was after 2005. So 2005, 2006, somewhere in there. I took the record to an actual studio in Hollywood. And I had them because I didn't want to just try this, go buy the machine, at Best Buy kind of thing and try this. I took it to an actual studio and had them turn it into a CD because I gave it to Audrey for her birthday. So she, in turn, eventually took the CD and had it turned into the YouTube. Let's see, so that's the only way we got it on YouTube is Audrey figured out how to do it and use the CD. So we do have some CDs, but I think I've got one, I think I only had 5 made, but I took it to an actual studio to do it. Because the reason why was because, well, as you know, with vinyl, right, I was trying to do this because it was starting to, and I'd still play it, right? I still had a turntable, but it was getting pretty crackly. And I'm like, oh no, that's why it was kind of after the master tapes. Because now the record's kind of deteriorating and it's got a lot of cracks and stuff in it. And so that's why I took it to them to kind of rescue what was left of it before it got even worse, on the vinyl. So they kind of got some of it out of there when they converted it. I'm glad I took it to a studio. They, got some of the crackles out of there when they converted it to CD. So that helped, kind of freeze it in time, sort of, you know what I mean? So right. It sounded as good as it could. So the version that's on YouTube is from the CD. So it sounds, it sounds pretty good. It's not too crackly sounding.
No, it does sound fairly clean. And I know those were the songs that, for those that are familiar with the band, have heard. Did you all have any other songs that you just didn't include on the album, and perhaps there was an idea to do something to include that?
The only one I can remember that I used to really like was, and George had written it. It was a song called Roy Lichtenstein that was based on Roy Lichtenstein, the artist. It was very different. I mean, it started out, it was really weird. It started out as kind of punky sounding, kind of driving, sort of punk, and then we'd stop in the middle and switch to a reggae beat. So it was very different. That was a very cool song.
Yeah, it sounds like it was neat.
Yeah, so there was a couple that, obviously, we had enough to, and we added a couple covers only to make enough to play like a gig, sort of, you know what I mean? We did one Jimi Hendrix cover. I'm trying to think who else we did. I don't remember anybody else we actually covered, but like I said, they were only to fill up, space, sort of, because we didn't have enough, originals.
Right.
And I don't remember any, and it's just, I'd have to find the cassette. I don't know if I even have it yet, the practice cassette, to see what other originals we had, because I really don't remember. It's almost like over time, the only ones ingrained in my brain are off the album.
Right. That would be cool to hear that tape, and that's something to get digitized before that becomes
right.
Unlistenable too.
I know, right? Exactly. Before something happens to the tape.
Yeah. So you never really stopped playing drums. You've played for many years, but did you have any moments where it wasn't the priority for you and you took a break from playing?
The only time I had a break was when I moved to Maryland. I didn't play for, I'm trying to think, maybe a couple years there. And then eventually I moved back to South Florida, and then didn't really do anything again, like another break. And then I didn't really do anything again until I met up with Audrey again, and we started with the cover band.
Where in South Florida did you wind up?
Hollywood.
What year is this around?
I moved to Hollywood in 2005. So around 2000, oh God, when was this? After that, it was quite a few years before we hooked up and did a cover band. And then then that kind of broke up. We didn't do that for a while. Then I took another break. So another few years. And then I really wasn't playing at all. And I was like, I missed it. I really wasn't. I was just concentrating on my career. I had gone back to school, was doing that kind of thing. And I was like, no, I really miss playing. And then Audrey had told me one day that she was teaching at a School of Rock franchise I think it was the one in Fort Lauderdale, one of them over there. And I never heard of them before. I mean, I've heard of School of Rock, but I didn't understand kind of what they were. And I was like, oh, so I looked it up, and they're all over the place. I mean, there's School of Rocks everywhere in South Florida. So there's one in West Broward. So I stopped by there one day, and I kind of still wasn't sure what this was. I still thought it was all for kids, right? And so I stopped by one day, and I was like, can you play? And they were like, oh, we have an adult group, that plays once a night. And then so I signed up for that. And then so recently, since then, I played about almost the last 2 or 3 years with the School of Rock group in West Broward. And then we would play, they'd have what they call a season. You'd pick a certain band or a genre of music, practice for 4 months and then go play a show.
Okay.
So it was interesting because it actually helped my playing quite a bit, because now you're exposed to different kinds of music you would have not normally ever played. And this was a little bit of everything. I'm not used to playing Guns N' Roses, right? That kind of thing.
I see.
It's very interesting to learn how to kind of diverse finally a little bit.
I think it almost pushes you out of your element a bit. So
yeah, it does. It takes you out of your comfort zone a little,
exactly.
Which is good. I mean, to learn new stuff. The times I don't play, if I go too long, I miss it too much.
Oh, I bet.
And it's as long as I can keep it up, keep doing it.
And just throughout the years, and it could just happen just by chance or whatever the case is, but are there times where your Atoms for Peace years resurface with some of the more current people that you play with?
Once in a while, I talk about it, I started in a band a long time ago, and it helps that it's on YouTube, because then, people know it's there. It pops up. One of the things was really interesting is, and kind of frustrating, I guess is the word I'll use, if you Google Atoms for Peace, right, you will get Tom York. Because Tom York from Radiohead started a side project with, I forgot who else was in the band. It was kind of like the Traveling Wilburys kind of thing, how they got a bunch of other people together, and they call themselves Atoms for Peace. So when you Google Atoms for Peace, you get Tom York stuff. And people are like, what happened? And it's I think we just didn't know what we were doing in Atoms for Peace. We copyrighted the music. We did not copyright the name. So I'm sure Tom York has no clue who the other Atoms for Peace is.
Yeah. You have
or that he even did that to anybody. I'm sure he has no idea. But it's because people say, oh, we Googled you and we got this. I'm like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, they have to. If you add Atoms for Peace Gainesville, you're more likely to get the results you were looking for. But to your point, Atoms for Peace on its own, you are likely never to find anything about the original Atoms for Peace.
Correct.
From Gainesville. And it is a very unique document. And it's just, I think it's fantastic that you all had the foresight to go into the studio and record that. Otherwise, there may likely be nothing to provide that. And
right.
I think to the Flesh Castanets, there was a demo tape, but who's heard that? Who has a
nobody
copy?
At this point.
It's
nobody besides me, Tom, and John.
It's extremely under the radar. It's so hard to find it. So we have Atoms for Peace, and it's so great that exists, and people can still find copies, as you mentioned, every once in a while.
They pop up every once. Out of the 5,000, one of them they surface every once in a while.
And I think that's part of it. There were so many that were pressed that it does allow it to come up in a bin at a record store from time to time.
Right.
I've seen my share here and there. I don't typically buy up just extra copies of them.
Right.
So,
It's so funny because I was in it and I have two.
yeah.
I should have like 100, you
should
would
have
think, but no,
100.
I have two.
It's interesting because there's a lot of people who don't have a lot of their own recordings, surprisingly, especially the
Right.
more rare stuff. Some have actually said, I would have loved to have had that, knowing what it goes for now.
Oh,
But
exactly. Yeah.
that's just
Who
part of
knew,
it, I
right?
suppose. Who knew, right? Who knew? So it's been so cool getting a chance to chat with you. And
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
yeah, I'm glad to have you on, Nancy, to take that trip back in time.
Yep.
And I feel like it's one of the closest ways you can get to time travel is just by sitting down and reliving some of those moments. And it's just been great getting a chance to do that with you. So as we get ready to close things out, I would love to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you'd like to share to the folks out there, both listening to this episode and checking it out on YouTube? The floor is yours to take us home.
Sure. I guess the only thing I really would say is if you want to be I learned this more with the School of Rock too. If you want to be a musician, you never did it, you always wanted to play an instrument, it's never too late, ever. And you should just follow your dream and, do what you want to do. And like I said, it's never too late to learn an instrument. It's never too late to keep playing. I plan on playing until I can no longer sit behind a drum set. and especially for women too. It's like, do not be afraid of, I see more and more now coming up sort of it's not like as an issue anymore, sort of, you know what I mean? But it's just like, especially for young girls out there and young women, it's like, no, don't be afraid of the drums. Go for it.